unpause.
I'd like to call the February 24th, 6 p.m. meeting of the Joint Planning and Zoning and Affordable Housing Revised Plan Advisory Committee to order. Could we all stand for the allegiance, please? Sure. I pledge allegiance
To the flag,
United States of America,
States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to do a roll call for the two commissions. First, Amy Balco. Chris Capola. Robert Dombrowski.
Present. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right, just checking.
Nick Gamelin.
Present.
George Miller, present. Tracy Shipman. Tracy Sisti. Matter how many we have on this. All right, from the Planning and Zoning Commission, John Michael O'Brien. Diane Jorsey. Tim Zigma. All right.
Here.
Thank you, Diane.
Sorry.
Tim
Sorry.
Zigma,
Here.
Brian Rogan. Here. Joan Beely.
Here.
Peter Zarabozo.
Here.
And Stephen Biella Jr.
Sandy Capola is here as well.
I'm sorry, Sandra.
It's okay. I just parked, so I'm going to be inside.
Yay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we just wait for Sandra to come in and Jennifer's not down here yet. So who else? is there? We have Jim Mahoney online.
So just to let you know, some of the other people joining the meeting are Jim Mahoney's on, as well as Eric Halverson, who's from RKG, one of the consultants, and Francisco Knowles, who I believe is the only other person I noticed on there. Yeah, Francisco. Again, FHI Studios consultant. And he'll be running the presentation.
Okay, so we'll get started, right? I'll just wait for Sandy if that's okay.
Yeah, Francisco, we're just gonna wait because Sandy's parking and we'll be
I heard her phone echo.
starting.
Yes, she is.
Okay.
Hey, thank you. Not sure where you want to sit.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is a presentation and discussion with FHI Studios, RKG Associates, some town staff and council, and, both the planning and zoning and affordable housing. So I'll turn it over to, is it Eric?
Francisco, I think.
Francisco? Okay.
All right. The floor is mine. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone to what is a joint meeting of the Plan of Conservation Development Committee and the Affordable Housing Plan Committee. We have a pretty robust agenda this evening. I'll go over that in a minute. As Maureen mentioned, I'm joined by Eric Halverson from RKG. He's our sub-consultant on the project, and they're lending us their housing and economic development expertise. So thank you all for joining us. We have quite a bit to get through, so let me jump into it. So our agenda this evening is we will very quick provide an overview of Connecticut's affordable housing requirements. I know the Affordable Housing Committee or Housing Plan Committee has been knee deep in this, but for our POCD members, some of this content is new. So please bear with us as we get everyone up to speed. We'll do so quickly. We will review the town's affordable housing stock and some trends that have occurred over the past decade or so. And then we'll go over some of the results from our housing plan survey, which we had very good participation in. Furthermore, we'll talk about the housing needs assessment. That's basically a lot of demographic and real estate market information that we've gathered. We'll briefly talk about zoning and land use in the town as related to housing. And then we're going to open it up, and this is probably the most important part of the evening, is we're going to open it up to a discussion with you. We've got a lot of questions. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, but we've got a lot of questions to seed that discussion. And of course, leading up to that, we'll also take some breaks in between for any questions or comments that you might have. Finally, we'll close things out by reviewing what is a draft value statement. This is a required component of an affordable housing plan. It's kind of like a vision or a mission statement, and we've got a draft version, but we want your feedback on it. It won't be a final version until you have an opportunity to weigh in. And then we'll get into some specifics about potential strategies and actions that we've populated a list. But once again, we need your direction on this. And then we'll very briefly talk about next steps. Okay. So very quickly, our Pocd schedule for those on the plan committee, so that you're aware of the process that's occurring. We have a parallel process of the affordable housing plan and the plan of conservation and development. The affordable housing plan has a more urgent deadline that we want to get that passed within the next couple of months because it's due to the state June 1st. We have more time on the Pocd where we plan on finishing that by the end of the year. Regardless, we're a little more than a third of the way through the process on both. So there's been quite a bit of work done to date, but still a lot of work ahead of us. So let's talk about the affordable housing plan requirement. And this is a fairly new requirement that the state has imposed upon municipalities across Connecticut. And which is the reason we're here talking about the affordable housing plan. The state's requiring every town and city to produce or update a plan at least once every 5 years. And the plan has to directly identify how the town or city is going to increase the number of affordable housing units within the municipality. It is a public process. The plan has to be made available to the public for review for at least 35 days. And following adoption, it's recommended that the municipality regularly update and maintain their affordable housing plan so that the state wants to ensure that it's being used as a reference and as a guide. And as far as what that plan looks like, those plans are starting to take shape across the state. I'd say to date, about a quarter of the towns in Connecticut have produced a plan, and they vary quite a bit. There is some recent guidance that was issued by RPA, which is a regional plan agency, and Connecticut Department of Housing. And it provides basically an outline for the things that should be included. We are following this. This is going to be our playbook, and we're going to ensure that this plan addresses all of the key issues and looks into all the areas that the guide advocates for. So let's talk about the affordable housing requirement separate from the plan requirement. And I think many of you are familiar with this by now. Connecticut 830G basically compels every town and city in Connecticut to work towards achieving or to maintain an affordable housing stock of 10%. And the state has a very strict definition of what affordable housing is. It is not just housing that is affordable, but it must meet a specific criteria. Towns and cities that do not have a 10% affordable housing stock or do not make sufficient progress towards that goal to qualify for a moratorium against 830G in their community are vulnerable to development applications for affordable housing that bypass your zoning regulations. which is something that's not desirable to too many towns and cities, to not have control over what is built, how dense it is, where it's located, what it, what it looks like, et cetera. So that's an extra incentive to ensure that you hit the 10% mark and hold it so that you can continue to maintain control over residential development applications that come before you. Berlin is just a little bit shy. It's at 9.24% currently. However, when the town every year has to do an inventory and submit paperwork to the state, next year's numbers are going to include the 2020 census estimates, which show more housing overall in Berlin. In turn, that reduces the share of affordable housing. So that gap's going to widen just by the census, new census data. However, there are a lot of projects in the pipeline and housing units in the pipeline. We'll talk about those. So we think it's feasible that the town can close that gap and cross the 10% threshold and stay above it, but it really needs to remain proactive in doing so. All right, so very briefly, what is affordable housing as defined by the state? Well, it's housing that is deed restricted, which is to say that if it's rental housing, it can only be rented to households earning a certain income, and there's a formula for that. It's equal or less than 80% of the median household income for the area. Or a deed restricted ownership, which say the sales price has to be within a certain range so as to be affordable to that same group of people. It can also take the form of government assisted housing, and there are various tax credit programs, low income programs as well. And there are a couple other areas that qualify. Tenant rental assistance programs like RAP programs, housing choice or Section 8 housing vouchers also qualify, as do subsidized loans such as CHFA and USDA loans. So those are all the properties in the house, the units that contribute. And so those are the areas that are likely going to be a focus of this plan, increasing the number of housing that you have either in one of those programs or one of those deed restricted types of housing. Very quickly, a very brief history of affordable housing development in Berlin. It goes back to 1978. Once again, this is as defined by the state affordable housing with the establishment of the Housing Authority, Marjorie Moore Village and Percival Heights in 1982. And then some senior and age restricted housing constructed in the early 2000s that qualifies. More recently, in the past decade, in the 2010s, Fieldstone Crossing and River's Edge, which is 100% affordable. Newport Center, 25% of which is affordable. Percival Avenue housing is age restricted, affordable. And then in the past couple of years, Deming Ridge and 404 Berlin Turnpike have been approved. Those are mixed use developments that are 20 to 30% affordable. And other developments on the Berlin Turnpike that have applications pending or expected, including 550, 1696, 309 Main Street. And those would be in that same range of 20 to 30% affordable. So there are units on the horizon, but they don't count for you until they're built. All right, now some of the factors in considering where affordable housing would be most appropriate include where you have sewer and water infrastructure to support the density. Typically, affordable housing is more dense because it's more economical to build in that way. And so that should be aimed for areas where you have sewer and water infrastructure that will support it. Where impacts to established single family neighborhoods would be minimal. And in proximity of other infrastructure, such as transportation infrastructure, whether it be roads that have capacity to carry vehicles necessary to serve the development, or proximity to transit. And also in proximity of other goods and services, such as stores, grocery stores that people can easily access. those are some of the most obvious factors. There are some other ones as well, environmental considerations and some other factors that go into play. But these are the general areas where you're thinking about when you think about locating affordable housing that you should consider. So let's get a little bit more into the numbers of your affordable housing units. As of 2010, Berlin had a little over 8,000 housing units, and the total amount of affordable housing units is 752. And that is comprised of government assisted units, mostly tenant rental assistance, a very small number, 142 CHFA loans, and 4 deed restricted units. I should note that other types of affordable housing units might also be deed restrictive, but you have 4 that their only means of affordability is through deed restriction. So that puts Berlin just on the cusp of being exempt, and there are 138 non-exempt municipalities in Connecticut, including Berlin, that basically communities that are not above that 10% threshold. And of those, Berlin's at the very top because it's very near that 10%. By example, Wethersfield's at 9.52. All right. And as I mentioned, that affordable housing has been growing over time, and Berlin as a community has been doing much better than the state as a whole in growing its affordable housing supply. When we look back to 2011, what we see is Berlin was at 7.2% then, and a decade later, you're at 9.2%, whereas the state was at 5.7% and really hasn't exceeded 6.1% over the past few years, and was actually higher in 2014 at 6.4%. So those numbers do fluctuate. And in the case of the state as a whole, supply has been lost as a share of housing. So you're headed in the right direction. I think the key and the challenge here is to ensure that you continue moving up in your supply. And so there's the numbers looking back even further. This is back to 2002 when you had about 3%, and you see a lot of growth in the 2000s, early 2000s, and that stabilizes or flattens out a little over the past decade. But regardless, fairly positive growth. That dip around 2010, once again, is as a result of the 2010 census coming back with an overall higher housing unit count. So your share of affordable housing shrunk comparably, and it took you a couple of years to get caught up. All right, before I move on, does anyone have any questions or comments at this point?
If I could just make a couple of comments based
Yeah,
on
please do.
a couple of things that I learned. So when you look at the number of affordable units that we have, and one of the numbers is the 142 CHFA. CHFA ones, those are mortgages that are on a house, and they're in flux all the time, because if I have a CHFA mortgage on my house, then I sell my house and I sell it to you, you don't get a CHFA mortgage. That house disappears from our account. And where the housing market has been in the last couple of years, people bid on the house, and a lot of people paying cash or whatever. People are even underbuying from what their income is because they can afford to pay cash for the house. So it's, when we talked to a couple of the bankers that were dealing with CHFA loans,
yeah,
almost non-existent in the last couple of years, because there's nobody will take a CHFA loan. They don't want to wait for all the rigmarole when there's so many people making offers on their house. So that's in our disfavor. The other thing, I can't remember exactly who it was we talked about, but when we talk about affordable housing, we do have to meet this rigid requirement from the state. But if you were to look at the landscape of Berlin, there are a lot of other houses that would fall into the affordable range if they had the right criteria associated with them, i.e. like deed restricted. So there may be opportunities here through some level of incentives or something to have people actually turn these houses into affordable housing by agreeing to some kind of deed restriction. I don't know if that's a tax incentive or whatever, but that's also an option to get the numbers up. I think like what the trailer park over on Deming Road, it's clearly, they're all affordable, but they're not deed restricted, so none of them count. Those are kind of some of the other things that we have to think about. Thank you.
I have a question. With
Go ahead.
affordability and the deed restriction, does the deed restriction expire or sunset after so many years?
It does, it very much does. And Jim, you want to weigh in on that? At 30 years is a typical, but I believe some are shorter as well.
I think the 830G requires 40 years now,
Or
but
40.
a lot of our deed restricted units are much more than 40 years. Again, Orchard Ridge and beyond, because CHFA is financing these units and they require or favor longer deed restrictions. I don't have it at the tip of my fingertips, but I know that a lot of those, if not all, are much more than 40 years. So we don't have any units, I think, that are expiring imminently. Let's say we've got a little time on the ones that are already deed restricted.
Was there any reason why that is? Why they have a deed restriction on an affordable house?
That's the question.
These are the rental houses. So in terms of rental, again, Stonebridge, Orchard Ridge, Sage Pond Place, those projects. And those are all deed restricted because they're financed by the state, and the state requires they be deed restricted.
Well, let me change the question. Is there any specific reason why the deed restriction for the affordable house would expire? I mean, that seems to be working against us or working against any town.
I guess-
Because 30 years goes by pretty fast. When you get older, especially, look back, whoa. You're younger, it's a lifetime.
They are privately owned, a lot of them.
Well,
So,
yeah.
I mean, a developer may not want to commit to more than 30 years. He might want to make a market rate after 30 years. He's committing to that, for
Yeah,
our
but
ability also to
I'm
give
just
them
wondering if that
appropriate.
works against us in the long
Yeah,
run,
but
because all of a
I'm not
sudden
sure
you've
you
got
can
this
come in and
mass
tell
of
a-
houses that is no longer.
It is the law. At the end of the day, it's the law.
yeah.
And the other thing, just accessory apartments, you have amongst the documents that I sent to you, and that second group of documents, you have 8-30GK, which is the subsection that talks about the types of housing. And Francisco went through it, it starts with assisted units and so on and so forth. But within there too, you can get credit for legally approved accessory apartments. Planning and zoning knows we started to have the conversation about the accessory apartment
Yeah.
opt-out legislation.
Yeah.
You can get credit for legally approved accessory apartments that have a deed restriction of 10 years. So if they're affordable, at least 80% of us of income, folks are only spending, the price of 20%, so we're only spending 30% or less.
I think one thing getting to Joan, I think Joan's point on her question is that, as I said, I think most of the state finance deed restricted units are deed restricted for much more than 40 years. But it is something that, again, we can look at with the planning regulations right now. I think we're tying our requirements to the state requirement, but, we could also consider making it a longer requirement for projects where deed restrictions are required.
All right, thank you.
This Commissioner Zigmont. Hello?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I still don't see the deed restriction projects that I've remembered. Oleski, Valentine, Acorn. Those are all deed restricted affordable units in there. I don't see them coming up on the report.
Those
Yeah.
are ownership versus rental. The listing we had right there was rental housing.
But
Okay.
I think,
But Jim there's other factors as well.
right, Tim,
Some
I
of
think
them
that,
sunset.
yeah, after the last meeting where you raised that point, I did check the deeds of those developments. And they were, either less than 40 years or less than 80% or more than 80% income. So that's why they don't require, they don't count. Also, just like Arbor Commons were 20 years, and it's 20 years ago, so they've pretty much expired already. So we did check that, but unfortunately, they don't meet the criteria.
Arbor Commons was a mandated affordable housing. We rejected that housing, and the state mandated that affordable housing.
Right, but the way they mandated it, it was not a 40-year restriction. They changed this. They changed the requirements after that. So, things can happen. As Joe said, I think the big picture issue is really, how do we try to make sure that deed restricted units stay deed restricted as long as possible, so we don't lose ground.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's move on. We have quite a bit of work to do still. All right, the Affordable Housing Survey results, as I mentioned, very good participation, over 750 participants. We heard primarily from residents that had been in town for 20 years or more, mostly from folks between 30 and 69 years of age. We did hear from a wide range of income levels, with households with varying housing costs. So we heard from a range of people from that perspective. We did hear almost exclusively from homeowners, and most participants live in single-family detached homes. And we heard mostly from those living in family households versus someone living by themselves or with roommates. And we're going to go over not all of the results, but some that will give you a glimpse into the feedback that we received. We asked if there's enough housing in Berlin right now to meet the town's future needs. And that's housing, not just affordable housing, but housing. And most people think there is, but it was somewhat split. And we also had a lot of people that just really aren't sure. So I wouldn't say we had a unanimous feedback on this by any means. It seems fairly split. We asked, are you concerned about the cost of housing or home ownership in Berlin? And once again, very similar proportions here, with the most respondents replying yes, but a real large percentage of people saying no, or that they're not sure. So it isn't real conclusive, but about 42% of people are concerned about housing costs. And here is a perfect split. Do you think Berlin might benefit from offering more housing choices, options, including housing which is affordable? And a dead even split on this feedback, yes versus no. We also asked, how do you think offering more housing choice options, including more housing which is affordable, would impact the community? Positive, negative, no impact, unsure, and just give you, we had a number of ways people could answer this question. So we asked about, how do you think it would impact new families in town, for instance? And most people thought it would have a positive impact. More housing would be positive in bringing new families to town. Diversity, people also, I think, had the impression that affordable housing units will directly translate into more diversity in the community. That's that top green bar, positive, so meaning more diversity. And when we asked about real estate values, however, a large share of people thought it would have a negative impact on real estate values. That's the blue bar on the left. And traffic, overwhelmingly, people were very concerned about the traffic impacts, about new housing development having an adverse impact with respect to traffic. We also asked, keeping in mind the definition of affordable housing, which types of ownership and rental housing units do you think that Berlin needs? And so we gave them a range of choices, and green means yes, blue is no, and orange or yellow there is I am unsure. And so we asked about affordable housing units. People were fairly split on that, but more in the no camp. Affordable ownership, however, and that's the middle bar on the left. Green is, or yes, was the overwhelming choice or the largest choice on that. So affordable ownership seems more preferred over affordable rental. Non-income restricted market rate units, people were somewhat split on. However, people don't generally responded no, that they don't think it's going to do much to contribute to housing supply or the needs of housing. And a couple other noteworthy areas, non-income restricted market rate ownership units, where people were fairly evenly split on that. However, people were very positive about affordable age restricted units for seniors and affordable age restricted ownership units for seniors. So both rental and ownership affordable units for seniors, people were positive about that being an asset to the community and helping the community meet its needs. And a couple more questions here, keeping in mind the definition of housing. Once again, which types of ownership rental housing units do you think Berlin needs? And a few more choices we gave people. Non-income restricted market rate units, rental units for seniors. People said yes. Non-income restricted market rate age restricted ownership units. People said yes to that as well. And assisted units for seniors, and people overwhelmingly said yes to that. So I think that the takeaway from this specific question is that senior units are very favorable to people in town, and ownership units are also highly favorable. We also asked if there were more rental housing units in Berlin, what type of impact do you believe the increase would have on the community and why? And so this was just a very simple question, positive, negative impact, no impact, or are you not sure? And the largest group of people responded that it would have a negative impact. More rental housing units would have a negative impact versus positive. And a lot of people were unsure. We also asked if there were more ownership housing units in Berlin, what type of impact would it have? And here people were more positive of ownership units. That was the largest response. However, right next to that, just behind it by about a percentage point, was people saying, I am unsure. And the rest of that response was it really about what type of impact it would have. So people are unsure, they're positive, but they're unsure. A much smaller share of people thought it would have a negative impact or no impact. We also asked more specifically about housing types, like what type of building or unit type or type of construction. And basically we asked once again, do you think Berlin needs more, yes or no? Green, yes, blue, no. Single family detached houses, people are pretty split on, that's top left, and then going down that left side. Townhouses, a similar split, favoring yes, but pretty similar number of people saying no. Duplex, two-family housing type, not very popular. Even less popular, 3 and 4 family buildings. 1 to 2 story multifamily apartment buildings, not very desirable. Less desirable, 3-story multifamily apartment buildings. And the taller we go, the less desirable they become, right? 4-story, 5-story, the higher up we go. I think the people think it's, our participants at least thought it was not desirable for Berlin, or at least that Berlin doesn't need more of that type of housing. Same is true of mobile homes. That was the least popular. However, congregate or assistant housing, people favored that more so than not. And mixed use multi-story residential commercial was also not favorable, or people don't think that the community needs more of that type of housing. Okay, so that concludes the responses from our survey. We have a few more questions, but I don't want to get into that data now. Any questions or comments at this point before we go on to our analysis?
Just a question, and I know I asked it at the beginning, but so my understanding that this survey was for anyone, not just necessarily Berlin residents to take. Is there any way to parse out just the Berlin residents? Was that part of the question where you could say this was the general response? You know, we had 700 survey responses, but only 300 were from, you know, people either in Berlin or considering moving to Berlin.
Right.
You know, if you look at the total number of surveys to the population, I know a lot of people do or, you know, don't like surveys, but as we look at taking that information to make decisions, I think we also need to take a look at the amount of people that we really are hearing from, because I think that's important too.
Yeah.
So there was an early question, right, Francisco, that asked
Yes.
whether you live in town or not, and gave the option to fill in the town that they lived in.
I can tell you we heard overwhelmingly from Berlin residents, and we can take that data and we could filter it and sort it in a number of ways. We have that capability, but overwhelmingly we heard from Berlin residents.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Okay, well, let's keep going. All right, the housing needs assessment. And I'm going to try to get through this quickly because I want to save plenty of time for discussion. We'll very briefly talk about population change over the past decade or so, your housing supply, permit and development activity, ownership costs, housing cost burden, the affordability gap. Eric will get into some of the details on that, and the housing supply and demand gap. So what drives demand for housing and drives up the cost of housing is demand versus supply economics. And Berlin's experienced consistent population growth for the past several decades. This chart here starts in 1970. You're a community of about 14,000 people then, and now you're a community of a little closer to 21,000, almost 21. So that population growth puts demand on housing, and there's some other factors as well, such as household size. Household sizes have been decreasing, so that means the same amount of housing accommodates fewer people because we have fewer families of 6 people anymore, is what it comes down to. That population, of course, is changing in nature, and much of this is driven by baby boom effect. So you have a strong population of folks that in the community. You've had a lot of growth in retirement age residents, and you've had population loss, and those would be the red bars pointing down, of folks in their 30s and early 40s, and those are, parents for the most part. You have fewer of those, and related to that, further left on that chart, would be kids under 5, kids 10 to 14. You have fewer of. So there are some changes in your demographics, and as a whole, you're getting to be an older community, which is happening across the state, by the way. Population projections conducted by the state, and let me caveat this by saying that these are pre-COVID projections, and there were, projection is no guarantee that what is projected will manifest. And certainly COVID changes everything, but it's some of the best information we have to go by. And what our population projections for Berlin are telling us, as provided by the state DECD, is that you're going to have a lot of growth in your seniors. And looking out to 2040, most of your growth will be in folks 65 or older, and with some growth in people in their late 20s, early 30s. But losing people once again in that 40s to 50s, because now we're going to take, if I go back, we're going to take the people that are in their 30s and early 40s and move them forward, right? You still, and so they're now in their 40s and 50s, and that's where you're experiencing loss. So that these are the trends that are likely to occur based upon what was happening the decade or two prior, but this could change. Your housing supply is overwhelmingly one unit detached, almost 80%, but you do have some housing diversity, right? This pie has more than one or two slices in it. You have 5% of your housing, by example, is in buildings with 20 units or more. So you do have some diversity. And when we take a look at your housing permit activity, looking back to 1990 and comparing you to both Hartford County and the state, we see that Berlin follows very similar trends. It had some peaks in the early 2000s with a lot of units built, but that's really been waning over the past decade or so. As it has to some degree in Connecticut, Hartford County has fared just a little bit better with a little bump over the past few years, but not a tremendous amount of growth with respect to permit activity. Now I should note that just because something's permitted doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually built. When we take a look at the permit types, the types of units being permitted, what we see is single family unit permit activities down compared to 10 or even 20 years ago. And multifamily unit permit activity is inconsistent. There are some years, and those dark blue bars are buildings with 5 or more housing units in them. And so what you see is you've had big spurts of those units being permitted, driven by bigger developments. 2005, 2011, and to a lesser degree from 2018, 19, and 20, with years where you had very little or no development in anything 2 units or more. The red bar on the screen are single family units. And you can see that over the past decade, that development activity or permit activity has been fairly low. When we take a look specifically at multifamily rental development, and this is comparing units that are approved versus under development versus built. And with the we're also taking a look at affordable and market rate. The dark blue bar is affordable, the light blue bar is market rate. And what we see is prior to 2001, there were about 70 units of affordable housing built. This is multifamily rental housing, and actually 0 units of multifamily rental development built that we have on record, approved, under development, or built. A lot of activity 2001 to 2013 with 423 affordable units approved, under development, or built over that period. And since 2014, you've had 418 market rates. So you shifted in your multifamily rental development. 2001 and 2013, it was heavily affordable. And over the past 8 years or so, it's really shifted to market rate development that's driving that. So there's been a shift in that type of development.
One comment, Francisco. I think we put together some of this data a little while ago. So additional units have been approved since then, and so we're up about, I think, 188 units that will be at least either affordable or qualify as affordable because they're CHFA financed.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So let's talk about ownership versus rental housing. We just talked about all the rental units that have come onto been approved or come onto the market. However, you're still overwhelmingly an owner-occupied community with 84%. I think most people perceive that's a pretty good thing. Renter occupied at 16%. And when we take a look at the ownership cost as a percentage of incomes of ownership cost as a percentage of income for homes with a mortgage. So this is with a mortgage. Anything over 30%. So any household that spends more than 30% of its income, annual income on annual housing costs, which includes rent and utilities, or if you own the home, it's your mortgage and insurance and taxes, is considered housing cost burden. So what we see is about 25% of households with a mortgage in Berlin are housing cost burden. So they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs, which is, there are many communities that are much higher than that, but it's still a fairly high number. When we take a look at rental costs versus income, it's even bigger. Almost half of renters, that is 49% in Berlin, spend 30% or more of their income on rent. So about half of your renters are housing cost burden. And when we compare Berlin to Hartford County in the state, we see the numbers are actually very, very similar. So you're not an outlier by any means. The dark blue bar is our renters with housing cost burden. The middle one are owners with the mortgage, and the right bar are owners with no mortgage. And Berlin actually does very well for owners who have paid off their mortgage or without a mortgage. They are very low in owners that are housing cost burden. So you're doing very well compared to both Hartford County and the state. And so here's that comparison again. Housing cost as a percentage of income, and basically renters in Berlin have substantially lower incomes than homeowners and have a higher share of housing cost as a percentage of their income. And so the top bar there are renters versus owners, and you can see that the income disparity between your typical renter, which is earning income around 56,000, and your typical owner household, which has an income in Berlin of around 129,000. There's a very big difference there. Housing cost burden. So when we take a closer look at that at owner households versus renter households, this is how it compares. And housing cost burden is experienced more by renter households than owner households, 47% versus 21%. And severe housing cost burden, and that is more than 50% of income going towards housing costs, is also much more common among renter households in Berlin. That's a little more than a quarter are spending more than 50% of their income on housing costs, compared to owner households, which is only at about 10%. All right, related to housing costs, of course, are home sales prices. And we know those have trended up, particularly over the past couple of years. And so if we look at the chart on the bottom left, looking at 2019, the median home sales price was $246,000. Last year, the last year we have numbers for, it was at $302,000. So that's a very big jump. And you could see, looking further back to 2012 is the chart on the right, you could see that upward trajectory, but most of those gains over the past couple of years. So it's great for you if you own a home in Berlin, it's worth more. But if you're looking to buy a home in Berlin, it's become a more difficult environment to buy in. And with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Eric to go over our analysis of housing costs and sales values.
Hi, everyone. Eric Halverson with RKG Associates, and thanks, Francisco. We've got a couple more slides to go here, and then we'll break for questions. So, one of the challenges with increased housing prices is that it can end up pushing more ownership units, whether it's single family or it's owner-occupied condominiums, further out of the reach of those buyers who might qualify, say, for a CHFA mortgage. In 2021, CHFA did increase its price limit for those mortgages. The price limit for Berlin is about $367,000, a little over that. They raised it, fortunately, and I think in recognition that housing prices all over Connecticut as well as the country, but obviously we're looking at Connecticut here, as a result of the pandemic and those really sharp sale prices jump that Francisco just talked about on that last slide. So at the request of the town, we analyzed home sales in 2019, 2020, and 2021, and compared the sale prices of homes that sold in Berlin to the maximum mortgage price limit for a CHFA mortgage, just to see how many homes in Berlin that sold could even potentially qualify. So on this slide, we show you 2019 and 2020 sales for single family houses. And you can see the total sales didn't change too much, about 204 total sales in 2019, about 213 in 2020. But there were fewer homes that would qualify as prices in 2020 started that pandemic escalation. The gray box that kind of sits behind the orange bars on each of the charts that you'll see represents the cutoff for mortgages at about $367,000 or less. And as you'll see, as we move through, that gray box starts moving further and further to the left as fewer and fewer homes qualify. Next slide, please. So in 2021, which is on the left here of the slide, more homes sold in Berlin than in 2019 and 2020. Here, there were about 227 homes that sold. And again, fewer and fewer of those qualified. It went from about 55 homes that didn't qualify in 2020 up to about 68 homes in 2021. The chart on the right shows just how much the median sale price of a single family home changed looking back at 2017 and looking forward to early 2022. There's an increase of over $100,000 in about 5 years, which is, again, as Francisco said, great if you own a home, not great if you're trying to own a home. Next slide. We also looked at the same price comparison for condominiums, owner-occupied condominiums that sold, but we didn't see the same results. Condos in Berlin tend to be priced lower than single family, which is very common in most communities, and only a handful of sales were above those current CHFA limits. Next slide. And the same is true in 2021. The graphic on the right again shows the median sale price change of those condo sales from 2017 to 2020. You can see prices did dip a bit, but they've rebounded by the time 2021 closed out, just above what the numbers were in 2017. So all this ends up leading us to a discussion, around housing affordability. In Berlin, there are about 17% of owner households that earn incomes which would be at or below 50% of the area median income, or less than $45,000 a year for a household of three. It's around 1,150 total households, that 17% number. And these households can afford purchase prices at a maximum of about $169,000. And if you remember back to the charts we just showed, there aren't a lot of houses selling at that price point. Next slide. We also looked at rental households in the same way. About 45% of Berlin's renter households earn incomes that are at or below 50% of AMI, or less than about $40,400 a year for a household of two. That equates to about 660 total renter households. These are folks that can afford rents of probably no more than $1,000 a month, based on the metric Francisco shared before of not spending more than 30% of your household income on housing costs per year. Most rental units in Berlin are renting for more than that. Next slide. So to analyze this further, last two slides, what we do is we allocate owner-occupied units by value to each of the income levels based on what a household could actually afford to pay. And then we subtract the units, the number of units from the number of households at each of those income levels that you see at the bottom of the two charts on the slide. So for example, if there were 100 units priced to households between 30 and 50% of AMI, yet there were 500 owner households, 100 units, yet there were 500 owner households at that income level, the graph would end up showing a deficit or a red line and a gap of about 400 units. So here in Berlin, like many communities that we work in, we see deficits for owner units at both the lowest and the highest income levels. You know, this is because honestly, there are very few owner units that are priced low enough to be affordable to households, say, at or below 50% of AMI. And very few units in the case of Berlin are priced to the highest income households. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the reality of the market in a lot of communities. So what ends up happening is households across the income spectrum, they end up competing for units that are priced in the middle of the market, typically between 50 and usually 100 or 120% of AMI. And that just puts a lot of price pressure on the middle of the market, where lower income households have to kind of price compete with higher income households. And on the owner occupied side of the market, we know that a lot of times higher income households have more ability to compete. They might have cash offers, they might have larger down payments, they may have better credit scores, and all the kinds of things that we hear in the housing market competition. Next slide. And then we did the same analysis for renters. And again, we see deficits in nearly every category except for units priced to households between 50 and 80% of AMI. So again, this means that households at the lower and the higher end of the income spectrum for rental units have to compete sort of in that middle of the market for the units where there's actually a lot more than there are households available. So when lower income households have to end up either buying up or renting up into the market, it creates the instances where lower income households have to pay more than what they technically could afford, which may mean, unfortunately, that they have to sacrifice spending on things like healthcare, transportation, education, childcare, food, you know, those types of things when they have to spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs. So hopefully this helps to seed some of the discussion. I think Francisco is going to lead you through around, you know, housing goals and strategies, and maybe gives you some ideas on where you might want to target some of those goals and strategies for the affordable housing plan.
Thank you, Eric. All right, any questions or comments at this point?
Just, I guess, a couple of comments. When looking at the numbers with like the CHFA, houses that would be in the CHFA gray area, so to speak, the house prices are pretty high. I'm just wondering, you know, what is really the affordability of those houses? Because there's also income limits on CHFA, right? I don't know if they upped them dramatically, but I thought it was somewhere around $111,000 or something like that. I mean, can somebody truly, and then you'd have that whole thing, and now we're in a period where we're going to see mortgage rates going up and up and up. I would think the affordability of many of those units, as you know, maybe at 3% they were affordable, they won't be at 5%, they'll be untouchable at 7%. So you kind of got that phenomenon too that's hard to capture. The other thing relative to the CHFA is, and I don't think you can capture this too, but I think it's out there, is when we were talking to some of the seniors, there's a number of them that are, you know, they're older, they're, you know, in their 80s or whatever. They're in those small capes and small ranches, lifelong Berlin residents that have been there for years, years, and years. You know, one woman we talked to, she lives all by herself. She's got a 3-bedroom cape, doesn't even use the upstairs, but she can't get out of her house. She can't sell it because she has nowhere to go. You know, from the perspective, like there was a huge cry from that senior group saying, there's nowhere for me to go. The wait list on senior housing is ridiculous. So we've got a situation really where, because we have such a shortage of that senior age restricted housing, we're not freeing up this other group of housing that would be affordable to a lot of people coming in. So, you know, it never shows up in the numbers, so to speak, so. I don't know what the answer is, but that was a very acute problem for Berlin. And as some of your slides showed, as our population is aging more and more, you know, the issue is like, the problem is even getting worse. The other thing I would talk to a couple people is like, a lot of these people that are in their houses, they, you know, a lot of mortgages paid, whatever, they can probably just barely afford the taxes, they can keep them heated, but they're not making any improvements or even maintaining these houses. So they're going into disrepair big time, so by the time they even hit the market, they need tons and tons of work, and people coming in, flipping them and selling them for astronomical prices. So that creates problems into the housing supply also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to your point, George, so what could be a nice starter home for a family or a young couple out? Now, that's not even an option on the table because there's no place for the senior to go. And there is a big clamoring for more addressed senior housing. They really like the idea they're going to stay close to the family, they're going to be able to help the kids out, and they're going to have a nice place, and they're going to be safe. And I think that probably speaks to something that we need to address.
I think in a few more years, when we start having more of the baby boomers retire, maybe another 10 years, you're going to have a real problem here.
Yeah.
Because the senior housing is not being built. What is being built, I'm being told, is going to be a mixture of rental, a mixture of rates inside. So that you build this building and you have 5 apartments that are affordable for a senior who's living on Social Security that she got when she was in the 70s.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go up. It doesn't go up to keep up with inflation. So now they have no place to go because they can't even afford to go into these rentals that they're building that have this mixed use. And there's not enough housing for people with a lower income.
Absolutely.
Okay, all very good points. Thank you. Anyone else, any other questions or comments? Okay, let's move forward. Okay, very quickly, we'll go over some of our land use and zoning assessment findings. We did take a look at land use townwide. We also took a look at where you have single family homes versus multifamily. And then we'll very quickly go over your zoning and a build out analysis that was done by the town with their mapping contractor vendor. That points to some potential areas for development. All right, land use in 2021, overwhelmingly, you're mostly a residential community with decent amount of open space. All that dark green are parks or open space, and some of that open space could be undeveloped private land that could be developed. It's not all protected open space. The yellow color is low density residential. The beige or tan color is medium density residential. And the gray is an industrial or heavy commercial, with that burgundy color being commercial along the Berlin Turnpike there. So, while the Berlin Turnpike and Kensington Center and areas in the north part of town have some commercial industrial, you're overwhelmingly a residential community is what it comes down to. And when we take a look at those numbers, what we see is the numbers point to exactly what the map shows us. 30% of Berlin is parks or currently open space, with almost 22% low density residential, followed by 14% moderate density residential. Industrial, by comparison, is a little less than 10%. Agriculture at around 5%. Your zoning, it largely mirrors or is a reflection of your land use. More than half of Berlin is zoned for residential. However, a quarter are special zoning districts that may include mixed use, special development type districts, with 14% being industrial, only 5% commercial. And when we take a look at how some of those land uses or zoning districts play out on the map, what we see is you have a small number really in comparison or a small geographic area of multifamily housing in districts in Berlin. And so they're mostly concentrated on the northern and eastern sides of town. And that includes a few different district types: Kensington Village Core, Planned Residential District, Berlin Turnpike District, which is actually a mixed use district, but allows for multifamily housing. You have a workforce housing development district. You have adult multifamily that's allowed in the Office Technology 2 district, and you have a planned office residential district as well. But those districts have a fairly small footprint. So while you have a number of districts that permit multifamily housing, it's really not a huge land area in Berlin.
And Francisco, just to note also that we're updating this map, but there are several others, either WHD or BTD in that Berlin Turnpike, Fleming Road area. So the land use pattern is consistent. There's just a couple of missing areas.
Right. Thank you, Jim. There are a few other areas of multifamily development. It's also permitted in single family zones for housing authority developments for seniors. So it's not that type of multifamily is not limited to the districts that I just reviewed. And also for the redevelopment of obsolete industrial and educational structures. When we take a look at where those multifamily developments are in town or are under development, we see, as I mentioned before, it largely follows where the districts are, eastern side of town, northern part of town. Red is an application that is pending. Green are projects that are complete, yellow are under development, orange are approved. And so there's been a decent amount of activity as we've already reviewed. And a lot of that's been, along the Berlin Turnpike, eastern parts of town, to a lesser extent, Kensington Center. Okay. And when we take a look at when those projects have been developed, the reddish color is prior to 2000. The blue color is between 2001, 2013, and the yellow is since 2014. And it's really been spread out over the years with, development occurring progressively through that period of time. I think taking a look at this map, it really calls attention to the Berlin Turnpike and some of the development that's occurred there. And I think the real question for us that we can get into briefly or shortly is, does Berlin have capacity for more multifamily development? And specifically, are there areas of town that are more appropriate or should be considered, whether areas that have already been developed or areas that have yet to have been developed? And as I mentioned, the build out analysis points to areas that have potential, they're potentially developable. It doesn't mean that these areas will be developed. This is a high level analysis based on the zoning and some of the environmental constraints. But everything that is shown in green there is a potentially developable area. Now, many of those areas are in single family residential districts, so they obviously would be developed for that purpose. I think what this map also speaks to is the importance of ensuring that you do hit the 10% affordable housing. That way, you don't have a project for affordable housing that bypasses your zoning regulations and is built in an area that is developable, but not compatible with the surrounding area in a place that is not ideal given the infrastructure in that area. So still developable land in Berlin, even though you've experienced a lot of development over the past 20, 30 plus years. Okay, any questions on the land use and zoning?
Francisco, do we have a sense, one of the comments at the very beginning was the ideal place for multifamily or whatever, was it, excuse me, areas served by town water and sewer? Do we have any kind of overlay about these areas that are open for or potentially available for development, and how are they serviced by sewer and water?
We do. We don't have that in the presentation this evening, but we do have that mapping. And I off the top of my head, I don't know what area of Berlin, what percentage of Berlin is developable. It's is serviced, excuse me, by sewer and water. It's less than half. But yeah, that would be a starting point for us, I would think, in this work, is taking a look at areas that currently have infrastructure. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Okay. All right, we have a bunch of questions. Some of these questions maybe will turn into very robust discussions. And some of them, maybe we can really get your feedback on them very quick and move on, because I've got 3 slides full of questions, and I'm going to try to manage the time on this, because following these questions, which is really intended just to get the ideas and discussion flowing and to get a much better sense for the important issues to you, we do want to get into the draft value statement and to some recommended strategies that we think should be explored for the plan. So I'm noticing it's 8:15 now, so maybe if we could try to spend half an hour on this discussion, maybe, which gives us around 10 minutes a slide, which I think is incredibly ambitious, but let's give it a try. First question. How do you think the town is doing with respect to the creation of affordable housing?
My view on that, Francisco, I think there's 2 ways to look at it. I think the town is doing fairly well in terms of meeting that state target. A lot of the new developments coming in, we are adding those numbers. But on the other side of the coin, when you really look at the demographics and where it's needing, I don't think the affordable housing that's being created is affordable. Because if you look at it, that you showed like what 50% are overburdened already, people in apartments, whatever. So creating more at the 80% level where they can't afford it, and we really need housing. Senior housing is an acute need, big time, age restricted, and not at 80% AMI of whatever. Connecticut, it really you need a lot at the 50% AMI and the 60% AMI, and I think we're woeful in that area.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I agree with George. Because at 80% AMI, your rent using the 30% number is going to be approximately $2,000 a month, which is pretty unattainable for most working and level seniors.
Okay. Anyone else?
Just to comment on that, I was going to say that, especially with the housing cost increases, the 50% of AMI units typically require, significant government assistance beyond the town of Berlin. So it's going to require state and federal programs to assist to create those kind of units.
So, Jim, I think that's a very good point. And, you know, maybe one of the elements that has to be in our plan is the state's not helping us. They're putting a mandate on us to do things that aren't really going to help the people that need help unless we get legislative help and some, you know, some grants or whatever from the state. It's not gonna happen. They're not really meeting the objective. They're not really providing a solution if we have hit our 10% of 80% AMI affordable housing.
Doesn't that make it an unfunded mandate then?
Well,
That's
yeah,
the
well, no, I
basically
mean,
what it becomes.
you can meet it, but it doesn't serve the need.
But, I'll play devil's advocate here just for a second, if I might. With the AMI, we're given a grid to follow. There's a calculation and there's also a breaking point as to how much of your income or what that stance can be. Of course, the maximum it can be is 80% of the median household in Connecticut. So they got it all figured out. And then you have the lower number, which is what, 60% now?
Well, again, as Jim
It's like
mentioned, those are
50%.
special programs that
Well, yeah,
require
so-
assistance. So when we go in and we approve the BT, whatever,
Yeah.
and they're gonna build 20% affordable housing, they're not building 60% AMI units, they're not building 50% AMI units. They're building all 80% AMI units. You know,
But to that same point, if you own a construction company and you purchase a parcel of property, you're gonna put the infrastructure in to build a building so you can rent out the stuff. Now, you know you have your market value, you know you're gonna go for the affordable value, the affordable element as well. But the problem becomes, it's still your numbers that you're crunching, and it's gotta be viable for you to do that project.
absolutely, that's why the people that are building 50%, 60% are getting some level of government
Yeah.
assistance. What we gotta be careful of is we don't just start getting moved by the person that wants to put in, you know, 10%, well, 10% doesn't cut it anyways, because
Yeah.
as soon as somebody goes and builds 10 single-family units, you're not at 10% anymore.
Yeah.
So even if you put it at 20%, if the 20% not really meeting the need, and they're just doing it to curry favor to get approval for their apartment complex,
Yeah.
that's not helping the people in the town of Berlin, really. It's meeting a target for the state, which that's one of the objectives. I mean, I don't want to discount that, but to some degree, that seems, in my opinion, to sort of be the we've been focused on that a little bit too much.
What,
No.
10%?
Yeah, 10%. We
Well, yeah,
rave
that's-
about the 9.27%. We got 150 units coming in, and most of them are not gonna do a thing for the people that are already in Berlin.
Well, it's the bully stick that the state pulls out, because they said, well, if you don't meet this, then we're gonna come and we're gonna do this, and you're not gonna have any say. Well, that's not a very good way to do business, but I understand where you're coming from. But I guess I'm just trying to say that there's gotta be a doable average in here somewhere. Because to try to get to the lowest target rate you can, I just think won't give you the quality project that people want to live in or live by or be involved with. Whereas if you get a quality project, yeah, affordable housing, you have to spend more money. But there must be some sort of happy place or a happy medium that somebody strike out. And sometimes I think maybe the best thing to do is to look at that senior housing. I think that might be the thread that we might want to pull on to see if we put in a better senior housing or encourage senior building. I mean, even so much as like a Marjorie Moore. I mean, they're cute little cottages. They don't require a lot, but the waiting list is long. Because it's a basically, from what I understand, it's based on your income. The rent is part of whatever it's a
Those are
calculation for your income.
That's why they're
Those are
subsidized,
specialty
because
funds.
those people can't
Specialty
afford more
funded.
than that.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is buildings that are really old. Does anybody have an idea of how, when those buildings are gonna need to be really rehabbed?
Yeah. Oh, no,
There's not enough outlets,
There's
no kitchen.
I understand. I think that the need is more for the senior housing. But
I think we do
I'll
need
let you
senior.
talk. In general, it's not open till later for public comment, but
Oh,
go
okay.
ahead.
I
It
don't
will
know,
be
I don't know what
later,
I
but
just
go
walked
ahead.
into, so I just kind of walked into.
Okay.
I just have a question. So it sounds like we have a population that's, you know, an older population. So in addition to, and it seems like you're mainly focusing on senior housing, but wouldn't it make sense to not only focus on senior housing, but try to bring families into communities?
We're
so that
not
we have
just
a-
strict, we're not really strictly focused on senior housing. We just, in
That's
our
all I'm
discussions
talking
and
about,
research,
right?
whatever, it just
This
says
particular-
that's an acute need, but it's not the only
Right.
need. We understand that. We do.
Well, along those lines, let's move on. I could tell we're not going to get through all these questions, so maybe I'll sample a couple, I think.
Yeah, just
the most
cherry pick
pressing
some
questions on each page. So let me go on to the next one, because I think it's a really important question. And that is, should the town continue its strategy of approving multifamily and affordable housing at higher densities at sites with all utilities, good road access in the TOD area, the Berlin Turnpike corridor, and at the margins where single-family and commercial zones meet? That's generally been the strategy, and will it continue to serve the town well?
It's hard to say
Yeah,
because this is something new and we've approved a few of them. But I don't think we've had a chance to really sit back and see if it's successful or meets the needs that we intended.
I'm going to say yes, because it seems to be consistent with the needs that were mentioned at the beginning. Proximity to transportation, food sources, grocery stores, water and sewer, you know, Hammer Town doesn't even have water and sewer access, so it logically makes sense to use the road.
my comment would be is that we've seen some really good projects come out and developers that have wanted to work with us. And so this has been a viable option. I mean, I would not close the door to it, but I think there's an underflow that also requires us to look at the quality of the amenities that are being offered in these different places. And that's something that we also push for, because their market value and then their affordability element to it. But we want to make sure that whatever community is being involved in this multiple family, in these commercial zones, also has livable space that's doable with a community sense to it, walking paths or just a common area, green area, people could socialize or whatever. So we're not opposed to it. Will we continue it? We'll continue to look at it as long as the projects coming forward are viable and decent, good projects.
I think one of the problems we haven't gotten into a little bit is in talking to some of the big developers is they're sort of going into the areas of least resistance from a planning and zoning perspective. Because I think what we need to do is look at those areas that you mentioned before, you know, those green spaces, so to speak, and look at the viability of those and make kind of a conscious decisions like, well, is that a good place for a condo complex or whatever? And if it is, you've got to change the zoning in those areas to allow it. Because comments coming back from the guys that do this, the big complexes, whatever, says it takes 2 to 3 years to get through the process of getting it approved, because you're always going in for a zoning change all the time. And it takes a long time versus if you, like we did sort of like with the motels, you know, you sort of pre-approve higher density there. So now they can come in, not have to go through that whole, you know, year, 2 years of the zoning battle to get something changed from this zone to that zone that allows this. You know, they said it's a real obstacle for doing it. So I think if you have those opportunities, the other thing that these guys mentioned too is Berlin is very, very desirable for these kinds of places. Okay, it's now
not the senior age restricted subsidized senior level housing aside. Because
Yeah,
that's got a whole can of worms around it in terms of funding.
Yeah.
But to get funding for these other ones, like the one at UT Farm, whatever, it's much easier because when they go to these people for this money, the loans, whatever, they see Berlin as very, very desirable, okay, for these types of conflicts.
Yeah.
So,
but to your point too about the green areas that are located, that's pretty much towards South Kensington. You see, the problem with that is there is no water,
well, I
no
know, I mean,
sewer.
that's,
And for them to pipe it in, they're gonna have to haul it all the way from New Britain, or they're gonna have to haul it all the way from Meriden. And that is a tremendous expense.
So that's where I think we need to look at those green areas, to see are any of those overlay with the town water and sewer, whatever, are any of those really viable? And if they are, we should look at what the zoning is and whether we would entertain a change to make them more desirable for developers. But aside from that, it's like, these are the areas where those efforts, I think, have been made to make them more desirable for developers to come in.
This Commissioner Zigmont.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yes, I think the overlay zone on the Berlin Turnpike has been successful just by developments coming in. And that's a reason for that is transportation for the workforce outside of town. Some of our workforce does work in town, but most of it works out of town. Same as the railroad station area. That's transportation that drives this. So I think the transportation is driving the turnpike too. But with that, the town has failed for many years, failed the seniors with not developing senior housing. And also the state has dropped the ball with the CHFA funds. When I was in real estate, CHFA funds were 0% down payment and 1 or 2% mortgage rates. You're putting people in houses for less than what they're renting houses for at that time. But those monies are not available now. So there's two places that's got to be upgraded: the state and the town.
Okay.
It's Diane Jorsey. I just have one comment with respect to the green spaces for the land use on the map that you showed earlier as part of this discussion, is that I think if you really drill down to look at the ownership of the bulk of that green space, the largest majority of acreage is probably owned by the town and also by the city of Meriden. And Meriden, I know, is looking to protect their watershed areas. So they're not going to want to see those areas open to development. And for the town of Berlin, it's all, for the most part, open space or green space. But perhaps the town would consider opening up some of those areas for possible housing.
Yeah, with respect to the build out analysis map that highlighted some areas in green, it did not include areas that were within watershed protection areas. So it excluded those areas for the very reasons that you mentioned. I would have to check, it may have included some town-owned lots that aren't protected open space or held for open space purposes. All right, we had a pretty good discussion around this. Let me, as I mentioned, we have 2 more slides. Let me move on to a question or 2 from the next slide. Well, here's I think a very good point of discussion. Should zoning modifications be considered to expand opportunities for accessory apartments? What do people think about that?
I thought we already allowed them.
to expand. So you allow them, but it's very restrictive what you allow. It needs to be owner occupied. It has to be occupied by someone 55 years or older. It's very, very restrictive. So should that be loosened up?
I don't see it as a big pushing. I mean, I don't really have a cry for it in planning and zoning. I think the first scenario is more what we hear about. We have the aged parent who wants to live with the family. The family would like to do an accessory dwelling for that parent to have their space and yet be part of the family. And that's where we have the applications come from, is we have a returning family member into the home. And so, I mean, I don't know that I haven't had a call for it to go expanding beyond that.
You don't get a call for it because you don't allow it.
No, it could be, but
Right.
nobody comes forward. and
Why would
says,
somebody come
"Hey,
forward to do it if you can't?
If I can adjust
Why
Maybe
not?
the
that
zoning
slightly.
regulations say I don't qualify, right?
I can make a slight, reminder, I guess. So probably it was some time ago, maybe a year or more ago. We did discuss at a planning and zoning commission meeting, doing some analysis of the accessory dwelling unit regulations and seeing what about them can be modified, or rather what they're actually saying. For instance, that the owner occupied, it is, or not owner occupied, I'm sorry, 55 or over. It's for the accessory dwelling itself, as opposed to either the accessory dwelling unit or the house, I'll call the house, the main portion. Another thing that the statute now addresses is the percentage of a dwelling unit, as opposed to, we have a fixed square footage for the accessory dwelling unit and a percentage of the overall dwelling unit, as opposed to, so that we've had a number of inquiries for something slightly larger than the 700 square feet that we allow. There've been a few that have been allowed variances because of the structure of the house. There would be nowhere to divide it without having that slight reconfiguration, or you'd have a silly storage room that really meant nothing, purely blocking off a portion of the house. So we did discuss looking at it to see if it can be tweaked. So that is something that staff has been working on doing, and seeing what some of the other communities do to address accessory dwelling units.
So we do have to do that.
We do,
We have to do that.
desperately.
It was October, I think that we last talked about it with you.
Yeah, but we haven't really touched base.
Again, in the papers that I sent out, the documents I sent out, there's Public Act 21-29. That contains the legislation, the opt-out legislation with regard to accessory dwellings, accessory apartments, and parking. And just as a reminder with regard to that if you do choose to opt out at the planning and zoning level, it also has to be done at the legislative body level, so at your town council level as well. They have to follow that same process. Those opt-outs have to occur before January 1st of 2023. So it is a hot topic. We went through not only owner occupancy issue, square footage issue, but some of the other portions of it. In terms of affordable housing, it's important to remember, and I'll talk to you about this too, that what the legislation says is that you cannot require the accessory apartment to be affordable. So if you decide not to opt out, you can't require that. That's part of the legislation. So, we'll send something out about that again. I have a summary of that because I did present it recently to another commission that's looking to address it in the next few months. So I'll share that. But that is that's a big question. And again, you also have E-30 GK, subsection K, which explains that if you restrict for 10 years and the approved accessory apartment, you can potentially get credit as an So make sure you read subsection.
Yeah.
It's one page. Just to familiarize yourself with what it says about accessory apartments.
Thank you.
Of the ones we have, I'm only cognizantly aware, one that I have worked with that was willing to, when they got their approval for the accessory dwelling unit, they were willing to have it be an affordable unit, but then they found someone over 55 to rent, so then they didn't deed restrict it. They instead opted for the 55 and older. So.
Okay, got some good feedback on that one. Let's move on to this one. Should inclusionary zoning provisions, and I'll explain that in a minute, be added to require a percentage of units be affordable in all new developments or in developments of a certain size, a certain type? So once again, inclusionary zoning basically means you have to build out affordable units to a certain percentage for certain development types, and it's typically a unit threshold, 10 or 20 or 50 units or more. Then you have to have a certain percentage that is required to be affordable. What do you think of that?
So in the case of the motels, it's what you did. Made a provision that they had to be 20% affordable. There's some precedent.
This would be applicable if you instituted something like this in your zoning. You could make it per district. You could make it across all multifamily districts. It's really up to the town to decide. But we did want your feedback on this idea, the idea of this.
I think it's a good idea. It's just that it's going to require quite a bit of planning. It's, it may turn off developers to build, but if the town in other ways can be more accommodating, i.e. through proactive zone changes like George mentioned, and we can kind of balance that, I think it'll kind of help prevent us from being surprised by having our 10% down. You have one development with our 10%, but there's another development that doesn't require affordable housing, and now we're back to square one under that benchmark. So I think if done well and planned out well, I think it would be a helpful thing for the town.
Okay.
I think if you want to be a little bit careful there, obviously we use it as an incentive. Developers, but at the same time, you might turn off some developers who are looking to do some really high quality projects.
Well,
But in certain areas too, it's all.
Well, I think we've been very fortunate because a lot of our developers who have come in with housing plans, one of the first things they point out to us is, we're going to have 30 affordable units. So they kind of beat us to the punch of asking for it. They're already offering it as part of the development. And I think that's, we've got them pretty trained there. So I don't know if putting a percentage level on it would work. Plus we have our planner, Maureen, and she knows to ask for those affordables.
Again, you may want to take just throwing stuff out.
No, this is what
Very
it's about.
specific areas, not maybe across the board, but saying, hey, these 4 parcels, can support multifamily houses if there's affordables in it. Otherwise, they can't afford.
Yeah.
Like some of those other green parcels or whatever, you might want to put those special provisions on it.
There's nothing stopping you from, to just address Brian's point, there's nothing stopping you from setting standards.
Yeah.
As well, like just keep that in mind. But as Peter's making a point too, made the same point, there has to be that balance there, where you don't want to put something on the books that's not desirable to anyone. So, this is why you have public hearings on text amendments too. There's nothing stopping you from asking for developer input. We invited developers to come and address the community as part of community outreach. So you could do the same thing if you wanted to.
Good feedback.
Okay, so I'm seeing some potential here. We can explore that a little more. All right, let me go on to the next slide. Because we are working on the POCD at the same time, and we're doing an update of it, and so the timing is right for this. Should the POCD emphasize or de-emphasize multifamily development on the Berlin Turnpike? And as a part of that, should the BTD zone definition be expanded to allow more properties to be eligible for the BTD zone? And there's ongoing mapping analysis of eligible properties based on the existing BTD zone definition. Does that make sense? Do you understand the question? Basically, you know, this is really specific to the Berlin Turnpike, and is more multifamily. It is ultimately a question about should we focus on more multifamily development on the Berlin Turnpike with the BT zone as a mechanism for enabling that.
So I mean, my thoughts on that is that the last meeting, we were focusing on the economy. And one of the things that we saw that we were running out of in Berlin was industrial land, commercial land, and we were seeing a higher demand for that. I mean, when you have industrial that offers jobs, pays positive taxes, I worry about, you know, losing too much of that, what we're seeing a need for. So I don't know. That is a worry of mine.
Yeah, okay.
I agree with Brian in the sense that I think the Berlin Turnpike has proven, you know, that I think it's successful with multifamily development. And I like the idea that it's out there because it gives people ready access to the jobs and different roads and the main arteries. But on the other hand, if there are parcels out there, I'm not sure, because I know there's a lot of little parcels that sort of staggered together. But if there are parcels out there that can be put together for some sort of commercial use, I mean, that might be viable, helping to keep the taxes sort of steady as she goes. But you know, but for me, it's a good place for the multifamily that's on the turnpike.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, you know, I mean, what's more desirable to developers or to citizens, people at large? I mean, is multifamily housing on the Berlin Turnpike going to be attractive to people that draw people want to live there? The developers want to build that, or is there more demand for industrial development there? You know, with Chris just talked about having contractors who enjoy that area through the location, transport, access to the road. So
yeah, I mean, so we've got two good things that are vying for the same properties, and we're running out of properties fast.
And talking about affordability, I mean, we're so dead set on getting to that 10%. We start losing some of these good properties.
Mm-hmm.
People who are going to be responsible for covering the cost of Berlin are going to be the residential, and it's going to go up. And how affordable are those apartments owned and everything going to be, or even for the developer to consider doing if taxes are doubled from what they are now?
So that's somewhat of an argument to take a closer look at these other areas to see what opportunities are there, so we don't.
Okay, so I think I'm hearing, yeah, you know, Berlin Turnpike might be an appropriate place, but you're concerned about it coming out at the cost of commercial development, which has limited areas to develop in town, and acknowledging a Berlin Turnpike is really a pretty ideal corridor for commercial development. Okay, I think we can move forward with that kind of feedback. Along those lines, let's talk about the Berlin train station area, the TOD district, Kensington Village. Should zoning supportive of multifamily housing be allowed in an expanded area or at greater density in the TOD area? So expand that TOD out, or within the area now, the TOD area, just allow even higher density. And along those lines, should increases in density in the Kensington Village overlay require a 20% affordable housing component?
I guess with regard to the train station, aside from what's already being built, is there really that much opportunity there? I mean, it's fairly dense already, isn't it? I mean, where's all the land built on there? I don't know where it is.
I think there's some potential for it.
Being bounded by Amtrak and the tracks, whatever, and you got heavy industrial in the back with Berlin steel. I'm not seeing where the opportunities are once you start tearing stuff down.
They haven't started building 2 housing units
Right,
either.
so I'm just not seeing where all the open, we got the Mattabasic River that, or the flowing through some brook there that overflows all the time.
Yeah, I like
Brooks in my river, it's fun too. I mean, I can remember at one storm, when it, the underpass was flooded with a car up to its roof type
That
of
was
deal.
fun.
There's some water
Good
problems
days.
down there.
Oh, that's the good days. That's what makes Berlin special though.
I think
Don't
it's
take that away.
It's fun.
How is that?
No,
I
honestly.
think the state corrected that finally by putting pumps in.
I forget
Well, yeah,
exactly
but the pumps
how.
broke down.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Slowly down.
I forget exactly how large is that Kensington Village overlay? How far out does it expand
Well,
currently?
The overlay itself, I thought it was just more.
So
It's a radius.
the core 1 goes pretty much just to the edge of Newport. It's a redevelopment where they're working. But then we have the core area 2 that's across the road and on the other side of the railroad tracks and goes back a little ways and then it wraps a little further. So I'm thinking a 1/4 mile radius. Jim, do you have maybe that number? If you're there still? Might be up to a 1/2 mile. But so I think the Kensington Village overlay hits Deming Park
Yeah. and
just
then
to there, so it includes Main Street, includes Harding Street, up to the corner of New Britain Road and Farmington Avenue.
Yes.
And then across the street from the new Steel Boulevard where the Maxon building is, I believe is in core area 2. So I think what one of the things about this question is we have the higher density in the core 1 right now. And there may be the opportunity where there are uses that are maybe not the highest and best use, or they're vacant buildings and they could be using somehow otherwise marketed and or redeveloped or renovated. Some may even be able to be renovated. Even Berlin Steel is only, in practically speaking, using a very small portion of their property. On the other side of the railroad tracks along Harding Street, there's a number of non-conforming uses over there, as well as some buildings that have high turnover with their
I like the
tenants.
way they're doing kind of the mixed use stuff,
Yeah.
on the bottom, whatever, it's kind of starting to bring together, here's the center of Berlin type of deal, with some vibrancy to it, or whatever.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
sort of like it, I think it's a good opportunity, with the train station right there.
I'm
actually
very
in favor of
excited.
it,
Yeah,
but-
I'm very excited to see it.
So that's kind of where I was going with this. I look at some Farmington Avenue and even Main Street, probably from stoplight on the corner there by Dairy Queen down to McDonald's, and there are some, 2-family houses and things like that. Yeah, on Newbury, Newbury Road, not Main Street, right? And even on Farmington Avenue, there's still a few two-story home and stuff, that could possibly maybe, if we open that up, then you have a developer who says, look at Kennington Village. That was ahead, it worked out, and they money, maybe they do want to invest into a redevelopment where they put two parcels together, or even just one, and they do the commercial on the floor, and then, we say, okay, get 4 units on top or something.
Personally, I think it's a win.
Something some of you might not be aware of, but for instance, the Avenue Restaurant
Yes.
was 2 parcels. They kind of had connected to each other. I think they were connected pre-zoning, but then they did stuff over the years. And they came in a couple of years ago and really expanded and now put on a big addition on the back. So it was as much of an upgrade of the building that doesn't have housing other than the units they had already had. They expanded for the restaurant, but there's the opportunity, despite driving down the road and seeing it as old houses kind of with narrow driveways next to them, there is opportunity to create something on those parcels when you have somebody put a couple of them together or go back.
The other option, and this is just, I don't know, maybe it's pie in the sky, but the Webster, it used to be the old Berlin Bank, but it's now the Webster Bank, which is right on the corner where Kensington Road crosses Main Street, that brick building. That would be great, senior housing. That would be a great location for senior apartments. I mean, everything, no, you've got the walk, no, you got the train station, you got the tavern on the tracks, you got everything happening. That would be a great. Yeah, they got the brewery. Hell yeah. Bring it on.
Francisco, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. So let's zoom out a little bit and I know there's a lot of interest in exactly where
Hold
would.
on a sec, Francisco. Yeah, he started to talk. I didn't want him.
Okay. So I'm hearing a lot of interest and curiosity about, well, where would development occur? And, I think that might be, well, in some ways that's for developers to figure out. But I really want to come out of this conversation with what do you think of more development in that area? Regardless of exactly where it would fit and whether or not the river floods and that sort of thing. What do you think of the idea of 100, 200 more housing units in that area? And is that an area where you would like to see more people living at a greater density?
I think part of the reason people go down there is, maybe the charm of the area, and that does have that small town feel of it.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be very careful of oversaturating that where it loses that, and then people are like, why am I coming here? It's like every other town.
Yeah.
So I think you have to find that balance in order to do that.
That's why I think that,
The mixed
the way
use
they're
is a good
doing
idea.
it with the commercial on the bottom or whatever, brings attraction from people that come down there, and then the way they go tie-back building, it's finally got stuff in it now. It's a good place, go down and grab a coffee, but they built it such that I don't find the apartments above to be intrusive at all, the way they built it. So
Right, yeah, we just have to be very
Stand like
careful.
that.
Yeah.
it's kind of like, you don't even notice that people live up there.
Yeah,
It's,
and
if
you
you do
know-
it right, I think. Real asset.
I guess to answer your question, we're not opposed to having more houses downtown, but the problem is that we have a limited resource downtown. I mean, I don't know of any large acreage that's available. But we also want to make sure we capture a specific feel for the downtown so that people will want to come.
And I think something I keep hearing repeated is limited resource, whether we're talking about the green space or open space, which has
Yeah.
a very big positive effect on the people who live here, or the commercial and industrial, it's a limited resource. Or it doesn't seem like it because when you drive down the roads, it's, you still have that small town feel, even though we're starting to see some, I think, nice developments, the turnpike, nice industrial along Deming Road and Christian Lane, but it does seem like we're getting built out.
Okay, I think I've got it. All right, we're gonna skip over the last couple. We are gonna distribute this presentation. So if you want to review these questions, if you're interested in responding back via email, please do so. We do want to get your feedback on this, but I think more important than some of these questions are bouncing off what we've developed to date as potential strategies and the value statement too. So let's move on to that. Okay, let's go back to your to the POCD vision statement, which is the statement that we've developed for this update, working with our committee on for the POCD. And we very much want the affordable housing plan to be in alignment with this statement. So I'll give you all half a minute or so to read it, and it helps provide the framework, I think, for the affordable housing plan, obviously for the POCD. And this is a working statement. So if there's something about this statement that really doesn't hit you right, our POCD committee has seen it. We've wordsmithed it from time to time. But you housing plan members, first time seeing it, let us know if we're off the mark. All right. How are we doing with this? This makes sense to you? Does this resonate?
I still like it.
Good.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
I like it.
I think we're good.
The only thing
Okay,
is,
so
I like it. I just think the verbiage is a little lengthy in the third sentence. I don't agree with it.
What third sentence?
which
Like,
one?
No, Berlin will continue to grow, but in a sustainable manner and without compromise. I think that line would be a little streamlined, like Berlin will continue to grow in a sustainable manner without compromising the town's natural resources. I don't think you need the and but.
Okay.
It's a grammar.
Got
Just grow in a sustainable manner
Got it.
without gotcha.
We laid that trap, especially for you to see it. Pay
Must
attention.
be an English teacher.
And you scored higher.
Okay, thank you.
Vibing of the Board of Education. That's right.
Okay, so let's move on. Looking back to the 2013 POCD, it had a housing goal. That's very relevant to our work here. We are we're doing an update of that plan, so we're not just pretending like it never existed. We're going back and looking at it and trying to build upon it and improve upon it. And that goal was the town shall work to preserve the current balance of housing stock while infusing any new growth with a sense of traditional neighborhood design, compatibility with adjacent uses, and ownership options that support housing choice for people of different ages and means. How is that still relevant? Do you think that's still a goal that we should be getting behind? Does it need to expand, change in any way?
Sounds good.
I think it's short. I think it's still kind of showing what we're trying to do.
Yeah, except we have to run it past people.
I think it's grammatically.
Okay, it's grammatically sound. Peter likes it.
So I guess, no, I'll just throw this out there.
Okay.
Preserve the current balance of housing stock, but we're getting feedback that this is short of senior level housing. We've got a demographic that's aging. We're going to be more seniors over the next 10 years. So preserving the current balance isn't really gonna meet the needs of the seniors.
True.
About something like
We're also gonna get,
regularly
we're gonna get
assessing.
pressure from
Yeah,
the
that's fine.
surrounding
Something like
towns,
that.
and people living there that wanna
I
move
mean,
here.
this is a 10-year goal, so.
She'll work to regularly assess, or, I don't know, some timely
Work
adverb,
to balance houses.
right? Assess, evaluate the balance of housing stock.
Maybe, I think it's the idea of preservation is important, and maybe it's more about preserving your neighborhoods and the strength of those neighborhoods. And it's not about your housing portfolio per se, as it is about ensuring that the housing development that you have doesn't compromise the strength of your neighborhoods in the community. Do you think that's right?
I think that's
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
I'm fine with it. I was thinking in one time, in terms of striving to ensure that our the housing that's available satisfies our demographics, so to speak. That's not the words, but we should strive to have a plan that meets the needs of
Our growing
citizens
aging
of Berlin.
population.
But we haven't heard different ranges of needs.
Pardon?
So no, in the bottom portion of it, it says to, support housing choice of people of different ages and means.
Yeah, the only problem I have issue with is to preserve the current balance.
Oh, okay.
That's what I have
Yeah.
problems with. That's the status quo. Make sure we got, 82% single family, no multifamily, whatever.
Well, maybe it's more of,
Keep the same mix of senior housing. We need more.
I like what he was saying about preserving the neighborhood, but maybe it's more of monitoring balance or, having some type of measure there. That's, I don't know if we can or not in a POCD would say, looked at on a 3-year term, every 3 years, or something to that effect. I think might help in that area.
So that could be a strategy.
Monitoring.
So
Well, we
you're
have to
kind of
do this
talking
every
about 2
5
different
years
things. We're
anyways.
talking about the preservation of character, housing, consistency of housing type
We have a lot on our
versus
plate.
assessing the need.
Right.
Yeah, protecting the character is definitely the most
Yeah.
important thing.
We want to do it thoughtfully, carefully.
Quality.
Yeah, quality.
Like
Okay,
that's-
I-
definitely agree with-
yeah,
Yeah.
And that'll
We need
open up,
more- We do need more. cities.
that'll open up all those single families for, the 30s, 40s that want to move to town.
so I think it was a very good point about, the preservation language, maybe the danger of applying that to your housing stock is that, right? Your housing stock is not evolving to meet your actual needs. So there's some probably work that can be done with that statement. And so we'll run with that in the POCD, and then that's going to translate into the housing plan as well. There are 3 policies in support of that goal, and I'd like to get your feedback on the continued relevance of those policies. Policy A was the neighborhood shall be the primary component of residential development. All new residential development should support existing neighborhoods and create a neighborhood environment with activity centers, recreational areas, and pedestrian circulation. Does that still hit the mark?
My only issue, I look at that where it says all new residential development have to create an environment with activity centers, recreation areas, and pedestrian circulation. And I think we might get into the point where you're going to be talking with a developer who, is going to put, let's say, 20% affordable housing in there. Well, that's great, but where's your community center? Where's the pool? Where's the playground? well, now it's gonna cost the developer more money, maybe have to reduce some of the number of units in order to accommodate that. So I think I just have my issue is just with the all, and I don't know if that's the right way to put it,
I
but,
think, yeah. I'd
you know,
say-
because as your expenses go up to build it, your rent has to go up so you don't
Yeah.
lose money, and then that's gonna affect the affordability of it.
I would agree that I think you should deal with the size. If you're doing 4 units, yeah, I don't see the necessary need for that, but if you're talking, 50, 70, 100, 200 units, I mean, there has to be quality of life that we really have to consider.
And I think most of the plans you look at when they're building it that big, they're already including that, because they know with the development that size, that's gonna be the expectation of the developer. If you're only gonna have like 20 units, most aren't expecting to have all that additional, because they're expecting that, yeah, the rent's gonna be a little bit less, because they don't. You know, and I think we have to find that balance too.
I also think the second sentence is somewhat limiting in that all new residential development should support existing neighborhoods. It suggests that residential development should not occur in any place other than existing neighborhoods.
Yeah, it's kind of contrary to the TOD discussion we just had.
Right, yeah,
I don't think it really fits that well.
okay.
Um,
Well, let's go on to the next one. As I mentioned, there are 3. Policy B, residential development design should support the principles of both Berlin's development and its conservation policy, basically saying it should be in alignment with the POCD, including the integration of elements that preserve and protect Berlin's unique natural environment. It somewhat of a vague statement. It just refers back to the POCD, saying it, should be in alignment with the goals of the POCD. So I don't think there's much to argue with here other than the fact it could probably be a little more specific or prescriptive.
I mean, it looks good.
And policy C, new residential development should be of the highest design standards in a manner that creates a high quality residential environment and enhances the adjacent residential neighborhoods.
I don't see any problem with that statement.
I think the challenge is, of course, this is an aspiration, but how exactly do you define that? What exactly does it mean? If you're trying to create affordable housing, it likely can't be of the highest standard. It could be of a quality standard. So it does push against that a little bit.
Just change highest to high quality design standard.
Yeah, maybe it's high quality, and it doesn't have to be highest, which might suggest luxury.
I'm just gonna say, because even where you creates a high quality residential environment, maybe you take the high out and go with quality residential environment. I
Quality,
think that's
yeah.
more important there. Just kind of flip it a little bit.
I don't know, I wouldn't mind seeing some.
Yeah, I know, I wouldn't mind that. I needed this to take along with the electronics.
Okay,
Affordable.
good.
Affordable, you know.
All right, let's keep moving. The draft vision statement. This didn't fit on one slide unless I shrunk it down so small you couldn't read it. So I'll give you half a minute or so to read the front half of it, and then I'll skip ahead to the second slide that finishes it out. And reminder, the value statement is for the affordable housing plan. It's a requirement of the plan to have what is basically a mission statement or vision statement. It's called a value statement in this case.
So just quickly, to me, the value statement is, I'm gonna make a statement about myself. This is who I am. This is what I.
As a community, this is what's
So
important
my,
to
my
us.
value statement is my end state, so to speak. This is where I will be. So all this will be doesn't make any sense to me. You know, Berlin is recognized as historic and progressive town. That's what I want. That's my value. That's my end state value that I want, right? I don't know.
I agree.
And, you know, to that end, high quality services are provided to a diverse population living and working, you know, whatever.
So less
Not
of
what I'm
a
striving
vision,
to be, but what I am. Pardon?
yeah, so less of a vision statement and more of a statement about who you are now as a community. Is that what I'm hearing?
Or during this 10 years, where we're gonna end up.
Yeah.
5 years, sorry. No, well, the POCD is 10 years. So this is the value statements for the
housing plan, correct?
You were.
Right, well, let's give everyone a chance to get through this page and then we'll finish out on the second page and we could talk about, you know, how it might need to change. All right, ready to move on to the next?
Thank you.
Okay, I'm advancing now.
Okay.
That's the second half of it. All right, what do you think?
If you go back to the first page
Yep,
of this.
yep.
I don't know, I mean, I agree with what George's assessment was with the beginning statement. And I don't disagree with the first paragraph, but as we get into the second paragraph and start talking about transit-oriented developments, you talk about Denton Road, do we really need to list where all these places are? Can't we just broad brush that? I mean,
Yeah.
because these are things that are already done. I mean, so those are accomplishments we have under the belt. I don't think we have to tell people where they are. I think they just drive around, look, we'll see.
Well, is this something that's gonna be, is this something that's gonna be offered to people who are looking to live in rural?
This
This is not that. Or is it just gonna be seen by the resident? Most of us know it.
I don't know, so you might want to tighten that big paragraph up and maybe just eliminate some of this stuff. I mean,
Okay,
It is essentially the introduction to your affordable housing plan.
so we
So
should,
it's the first.
all right,
Is
so,
what it's gonna
So
be.
you wanted.
so you want to put it in there to let the state know that we're doing all this
Well-
stuff. Is that what it is?
It's
yeah, that being said, we have plenty of opportunity within the plan to focus on geographic areas in town. So we may not need to do it within the statement itself.
I'm looking at that first paragraph and I'm not sure I understand what we're saying when we say commercial property supported by stable and equitable revenues. That's kind of confusing me a little bit.
stable taxes.
They're vibrant commercial properties
Like
essentially.
Northeast Utility. Yeah, but just show how we're saying it's equitable just because of the mill rate. I mean, is that where we're saying it's equitable revenues?
I think equitable to, and of course they can comment better, but I think balancing housing, commercial and industrial in the revenues.
So that's
So
not carrying
meaning
just
tax
like
base. Tax
The tax base that's fair and equitable.
Yeah, more residential.
Yeah, it's to have some balance between the commercial. I'm not sure it completely reads that way, but it seems that.
The thing that stands out for me in the first paragraph is the high quality services. And the first thing that comes to mind that we really haven't talked about is improving infrastructure. And I'm not sure if it belongs here or not, but it's an important component that, you know, is easy to forget about. And then the other thing is future housing development near the bottom of the page. Future housing development should continue to align with, I think should become a more affirmative statement. Will, shall.
Shall, it's probably the most powerful.
Yeah, I would agree with that change, Diane.
Anything else?
Can you go to the second page again, just to?
Yeah.
The second one. Thanks. Going with what Diane was talking about with infrastructure, maybe that's somewhere that it could be worked in where it's saying Berlin be a convenient highway network, low mill rate, strong fiscal management. Maybe we can throw something about the infrastructure in there.
Well, I'm thinking of more than highway infrastructure.
No, I just think that's where it would fit. I'm not saying that,
Yeah.
that's the only thing we're referring to, but I think it might fit in that portion, because I think it is important, Diane.
You know, technology is changing so fast. I think that's part of what we need to be including in our conversations.
What specifically, Diane, just out of curiosity, what do you have in mind?
No, I'm just thinking, you know, from a technology perspective and all of the changing phone services and computer services and enhancements that are coming down the pike. We shouldn't forget about that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what they are because I'm not that smart with those things, but.
You mean like 5G stuff?
No, the some of the towns getting roll out with fiber optic internet, it seems.
You know, I mean, we have.
New cable companies coming.
Yeah. So,
We got a call from
GoNet-
Comcast that wanted to do a
GoNet
survey
investments
to
in
find out how I
yeah.
felt about it.
fiber optic.
Frontier was
We gave it to
rewiring the entire town.
Well, partway, we got
Yeah.
partway through, I started chuckling over one of the things she asked. And I said, oh, you're
So,
worried about the competition, huh?
I guess for me, for infrastructure, I would set it. I think it'd be nice, like on Farmington Avenue, to have middle lane for turning left and right. Because that traffic is starting to drive me insane.
I still like roundabouts.
I think what I'm hearing is infrastructure, is housing needs to be tied to the community's ability to invest in and maintain the infrastructure that supports it, right? That's really important.
Correct. Oh, yeah.
That's good.
Okay, okay. All right, well, let's keep
This
going.
This Commissioner Zigmund, on the
ahead.
quality of town services, I think that probably should be expanded to our fire department, police department, the health services. That we expand those services in our looking down the road.
Okay. So that housing growth is accompanied by expanded services.
Right, the quality of the town services is going to reflect on your police department, fire department, highway department, health services.
Okay. All right, good. Well, let's move forward. All right, this is the overarching plan goal. This is really the call to action. And let us know if you think the plan should have other goals that are a little more diverse than this. The very obvious need here is really to hit that 10% mark and exceed it. That's why the state is asking communities to do plans. That is the goal of this plan. However, that's not where your goals need to end. That's where they begin. So we've for the time being, we've identified that one goal. But you tell us, should there be other goals on this list that the housing plan is aiming for, is working towards?
I think it goes back to the beginning of the meeting when we talked about the really more senior.
Mm-hmm.
That should be a primary focus, looking at the demographics.
Options for seniors.
And Francisco, can we please change state mandate? That the state really doesn't like it being referred to as a goal to statutory threshold or 10% threshold.
Okay.
Because that's the whole point of this whole analysis, is that the expectation by the state that engaging in the housing needs assessment, that some towns may figure out they need more than 10%. I just think it's a mistake. I don't think we should be, Berlin's been criticized by several groups. It's not a good idea.
I think also you need to include diversity. Even though the survey didn't really reflect that as a priority for those taking the survey. We certainly want diverse neighborhoods.
I think we have to be careful though about tying that to affordable housing at the same time. Just because you're doing affordable housing doesn't automatically have diversity because of that.
Some people might be put off by that.
I mean, if you have a diversity goal, you have to have objectives for achieving the goal. So what types of initiatives and objectives would we have to make our neighborhoods? I mean, as a housing authority, whatever, are we going to actually go out and seek out, minority groups and things like that to bring them in?
Maybe a better way is
I mean,
to
it's what you want to have happen, but unless you're going to have
Well, that's the thing.
specific
If we build-
initiatives to make that happen.
Yeah, but if we build the housing that is at a level that these people can afford, then they will come. It just has to be a place for them to come to. And they shouldn't be excluded just because they're different. That's a very sad statement from a lot of people, that they don't want those people here. And that's sad.
I don't think that's the statement.
People say that all the time.
Well,
I don't think we're not going to make that statement in this
No,
way.
that's not a
But on the other
statement.
side, I
Yeah,
don't think we want to specifically make a statement that we're going to have initiatives coming out of this plan that go out and seek out and bring in, like, I think like you said, make it affordable and they'll come.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, if it's
That's the way
affordable.
I would agree with that.
I would like to address the senior element too.
Well, I think to that end, we have to, as we're going forward and more affordable housing is being proposed and whatever, we want to make sure that it aligns with the needs of the community, right? It's the most critical needs, which is seniors right now.
Yeah.
But that can change.
Yeah, well, it could change.
I'd suggest, and you know, Jennifer has much more experience as does Francisco with the plan itself and what the state's goal of what it should say is. But I'm wondering if this statement should include something about identifying the needs of the town and achieving the development. So that, you know, that's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we don't conflate goals with strategies. Now, the goal is where you want to get to. And we're going to next move into strategies, and there's different language for this, of course. We could talk about objectives, and that's progress towards the goal. So strategies are how we get towards that goal. But should this plan be focused on doing anything more than just getting up and above that 10% affordable housing supply? Is there another specific goal that we could point to? And I heard expand housing for seniors because we talked about quite a bit. Is there anything else we should be aiming for?
Well, the statement probably should say the needs of all town residents. And that's not specifying anyone particular, that all town residents should have affordable housing and services and all, you know, and that, you know, and maybe you could put in there, including all seniors, all senior citizens, our growing senior citizens need and the affordability's in there, so all growing citizens age needs agent citizens or something like that.
When we get, I'm just thinking of, I get where Tim's going with that, but my concern is that we're all in there. I think that's really pigeonholed, put all town residents.
And this is a 5-year plan, so it should have a little bit more specificity to it.
I just get worried with the word
Everybody,
all, because that could be.
I agree.
One thing I'd like to see in there written after additional quality. Affordable. Not just any affordable.
Yes, you could include both for seniors and young families, because we obviously have more growing senior population, but to someone's point, we don't have housing for drawing young families, then it's good for the town.
But that sentence catches it all though, right? That will meet the needs of town residents, that means young and old.
Well, I was referring to George's specificity.
The way you're talking about here, it almost sounds like we're, you know, we also have a goal to attract, you know, younger families or, you know, attracting them is a goal. We can't make them come here, but I think we can, if we word it that way, we could wordsmith it a little bit by saying, you know, our goal is to attract some.
Again, if you have a goal, then you should have strategies for achieving your goal.
I think he said that's like the next
Right, I
phase
know,
of
but
it,
just
yeah.
keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Now, when you say that, you want that in there. I'm not arguing against it. You want that in there, now you gotta think, what are you gonna do?
Right, but if we
Yeah.
take care of the senior housing issue, then that can help with attracting some of the younger families again, so it can tie into that. But again, it's attracting them, we can't make people come here, but we do what we can to make them feel welcome.
Well, I've got some good feedback here. I wrote down quite a bit, actually. Let's move on to some strategies. And once again, we're putting some ideas out there. It's all open to discussion. And so here we are. Here's the first one. Strategy 1, provide more affordable home ownership opportunities. So we're getting very specific about what type of housing, and comprising that strategy would be a number of actions that the town would need to take to provide more affordable ownership opportunities.
So I guess the first one isn't that sort of the role of CHFA to begin with. I mean, they already do that. I think the town should be in the business of offering the same services. I mean, the issue there is CHFA already does that. Problem is there's not inventory for CHFA houses, so I'm not sure what that would help us do. Plus, it would cost the town money, which we don't have a ton of.
No, but I'm wondering if there's a way, and I don't know if we have any companies in town big enough to do something like that, but where, for example, like Yale, some of the people that either work for them or are moving into the area, or if they move into New Haven, then they help supplement their down payment or do something for them in that instance. I mean, maybe it's something we can talk to companies about. I don't know. I don't know if we have anyone big enough in town to do something like that, but.
Like I said, that's
You
what
know.
CHFA does.
Yes.
That's what they do.
Yeah, I mean, there are nonprofit programs that stand a little beyond CHFA, have stipulations that require you to stay in the home for 5 years, offer down payment assistance and so on. So I don't know if the town considering to engage or outreach with those kind of nonprofit mortgage programs. That might be a way to not burn out the town, but also, yeah.
So Francisco, one of the things that I don't know is what are you even allowed to do? You know, I'm not sure in coming up with strategies, what types of incentives can you give? So for example, again, when we were talking to some of the seniors and they can't leave their house. So are you allowed to do things like, you know, we give them priority access to the senior housing that does exist if they are willing to, and they're gonna sell a house. I want to sell my house, but I want senior housing. Can you bump them up in the list if they would make their house available for a CHFA mortgage? So they go into affordable housing and you generate an affordable house. But I don't know if that's doable. Is that?
No, I don't know. That's an interesting idea. I'm not aware of any programs to that effect.
I mean, you could change the strategy to something like explore the implementation of a first-time homeowner down payment assistance program, you know, research, explore, something like that, because I think you're asking a very good question. And I don't know, Francis, we didn't talk about this, if maybe you were intending that the town establish some sort of a housing fund and then pursue that strategy. I mean, that's one possibility that we know other towns have done, right?
Yep.
I don't know about the first time down payment assistance. Taxpayer money in Berlin, but maybe you do tax abatement. It's like, hey, you're throwing out all this money right now, you know.
Well, there's plenty.
And you can't do that by
50%
statute.
first year, 75% the second year, and you pay full taxes like everybody else.
There's plenty of first-time homeowner down payment assistance programs besides CHFA, and you know, there's HUD and there's I mean, there's plenty of different programs out there. It's just promoting them, get them to use it in the market. Veterans assistance. You know, there's plenty of.
If I could make a note on
Right.
this slide, USDA, Berlin is not approved for USDA loans.
Yep.
It is not.
Oh.
And the problem is getting sellers to accept the CHFA loans and the FHA loans. So Jennifer, I think you were starting to talk about maybe incentivizing these types of loans. The only place I see that we would be able to do that is with conveyance taxes.
Only real big issue I could see either with, outside programs would be great, but anything that the town does, even with my tax abatement idea with this thing is, I could see that causing a lot of angry citizens who are saying,
Yeah.
I could see that.
We're already getting a lot of agita just with tax abatement to get
The
the incentives
businesses,
to
right,
bring
yeah.
industries in.
And all brokers won't know about it, especially if they're from a different town. So I don't know that that's a good solution anyway. Just wanted to make note of it.
Okay. Does the idea of the town being very proactive about promoting loan programs and assistance that's out there, is there an opportunity there for the town to be just more proactive in connecting people with those programs?
I mean, I think there's always an opportunity for that, but at the end of the day, it's real estate agents and brokers and, how they're best guiding their sellers for what offers to accept.
Yep.
Then the real estate agents and brokers would have to be educated on CHFA because there's no difference on their loans basically than any other loan.
No, that's not true. CHFA is federally funded, so they can actually put requirements on the sellers for property of condition, condition of property, excuse me. So
Yeah, inspections and condition, yes, they may have to improve stairs going in the house or whatever, or some type of condition on the house.
peeling paint,
Yeah.
no water damage, no broken windows, that
That's-
kind of thing.
I sold many houses under CHFA. It's more than the real estate agents, more accepted than the real estate agents today realize, and that it's not as much as a deal that you think it is. And it's just not being used as it should, and that takes a lot of education of the real estate brokers today.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I've sold CHFA properties as well. Mostly though, they were in Hartford, New Britain, places like that. So I just am trying to anticipate challenges that we have, and maybe we can brainstorm on how we can get ahead of them or overcome them.
The other part on this one we're looking at is the last one, we're saying support a home repair maintenance program for low-income households. Again, are you looking for the town to do that with tax money? Or are we looking to say, gee, you know what, there's, I know different churches will go and help different members that have an issue with this or that, is it trying to encourage some of that in organizations we already have in town? Boy Scouts cleaning up someone's yard or things like that, where, or are we talking about, town maintenance people going to someone's house on certain days, or are we talking about, again, tax money, paying these kind of things? I think we have to be careful what we're talking about there.
Yeah, it would likely take the form. There are a lot of different types of programs in different cities and towns. They're not all that common in Connecticut. It could take the form of just someone who's a coordinator. You have as the town, you have a zoning enforcement officer or anyone who's responsible.
We don't have one.
Sorry.
Sore subject.
Subject.
Relative to time, I know I'm not in a good position to start thinking about some of these things now. This is not a 5-minute conversation to me. This is a whole meeting. This is after we have some understanding about what can we do, what types of incentives are allowable under the law. This is about when we've done some research, like, okay, what are other towns doing?
Jennifer has just given us like 4 or 5 affordable housing plans that are there. What are people thinking there? We gotta get some things in our head that kind of will help us to generate some ideas. I'm not sure this is a good productive use of time right now because I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make
Well,
one point though.
Yeah, well, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's give you all an introduction to the strategies that we've laid out there. And rather than getting into the actions, we'll just flip through the strategies just to get you introduced. And between now and your next meeting, you can do that homework. How's that?
At least if we have the slide deck, we can take a look at it.
Right, I
Really
mean, that
get some
will-
hard
then-
thoughts to it.
We'll
Yeah.
do some reading, do the other plans.
Yeah, and I think several of you probably did have the opportunity to download the package that Jennifer sent out and dive into it. But I know it's like drinking from a fire hose, right? There's a lot of information here. So let me do this. Let me flip through the strategies, and we won't get into the actions. We'll just introduce you to the strategies. And once again, all these strategies, the intent is that these strategies will help increase your housing supply, affordable housing supply specifically, okay? All right, so strategy 2 would be to provide more affordable housing for seniors. Strategy 3 is to refine existing zoning regulations to better support affordable housing. Strategy 4 is maintain a focus on expanding affordable housing supply. And those are the big strategies. There are some other potential, what I'll call actions. Maybe they could comprise another strategy that we've noted here as well. And so those are the ideas. That's where we're at. And what we need from you, and I realize it's getting late in the evening. We've covered a lot of ground already. So it probably is best that you take this back and you have time to digest it and think about it. But we want more of the type of feedback that we received from you this evening. It's all been incredibly helpful. It's pointing us in the right direction, but we need your guidance in this process. Okay.
Sure.
All right. So for our POCD committee members, that process continues as well. We do need to launch our community engagement efforts. And I think our timing is good with this. Omicron is calming down a little bit, which might enable us to do something in person. We've got an online survey that we're gonna, I think, launch very soon. I need to connect back with Jim and Maureen on that. We need to schedule some stakeholder and focus group meetings that now we're looking at more like probably early March for that. And where there's other work that continues and is ongoing, we're still working towards the transportation facilities and infrastructure meeting, which is our meeting next month. And of course, our affordable housing plan of work continues as well. Maureen, I did not have a date for our meeting in the calendar for our POCD committee. Do you have that in your calendar? Or can we pin that?
Yeah, I'll look again tomorrow to make sure that we didn't set a date in the notes, but was consistently supposed to be the 4th Thursday, so the 24th would be the day.
I have it as the 24th.
Yeah, Thursday, the 24th at 5:30, I believe, right? We stop at the 5:30s?
Correct, yeah, 5:30.
I wouldn't mind,
What?
I wouldn't mind. Keeping it at 6. 5:30 is gonna get started.
Oh, as you get to the spring, as the days get longer.
Can we do 6?
Yeah, I can do March at
Next one,
5:30.
6 o'clock instead?
Yeah, daylight savings is the 13th, so.
All right, you want that at 6 o'clock then?
I prefer 6.
All right, anyone else? George? Six.
I'm like-
Aren't you guys
I
coming
like
back?
1 o'clock. in the
Aren't you coming
afternoon.
back?
Thursday, maybe we're over at
Yeah, I got voted up.
3 o'clock, 4 o'clock.
The meeting will go a lot quicker.
Well, I had it down for combo meeting. That's why I thought. All right, so it's just us. That's boring. I like when we're driving.
All right, so with our next meeting scheduled, that concludes the presentation. Any questions or comments, any direction that you folks would like to give us as we continue our work before we close out?
I'm gonna take back the screen. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it was a good meeting. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, Prince.
Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no,
There-
thank you.
a section here for public comment. We have one person in the public.
I just want to apologize, I had no idea what I was walking into. I
You're
was
welcome
walking here, I
anytime.
didn't know that
Oh,
this was all like people,
Yeah, what'd you
like
think
talking,
you
I'm
were?
used to just like talking, and I feel like it. Oh, yeah. But, yeah, I'm very interested in following the affordable housing process, so you're probably gonna be very interested in where this goes and how people get need affordable housing really, really badly in this community for families that, you know, are lower income families. Because I think Berlin is not diverse and we need to invite some diversity to this community. Very.
Or you should, you know, do we need her name or?
Oh,
for the
yeah.
record?
Sure. My name is Aurora Portable. Do you want my address? Oh, yeah. RORA Portable, CORTEVILLE.
Are you in Berlin?
Yeah, I can walk.
Oh, okay, so you're a resident. of Berlin.
Yeah, I would.
Okay, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me and
It's a pretty-
tolerating me, not
isn't
knowing
it
what the heck is
cold
going
night
on.
for you to be walking?
Say that again?
Isn't it a cold night?
I literally, it takes like 5 minutes.
Get fresh air.
Okay,
Yeah,
if I could bring
later,
it back around, do you
Yeah.
have any final comment?
No,
Okay,
so we don't have any, we have 2 March meeting dates that we talked about that it sounded like were not good for everyone. So we're gonna go back to the drawing board on that and send out an email
okay,
potentially to all the committee members. Or maybe we could do that in the morning. And if you could just respond as to your availability, I hope that, let's see, is Amy and Rob look like they're on, so we'll reach out to them.
is Rob on?
Rob was on.
I didn't see
Yes.
him before. Oh, no, that's right, he was on. Amy was there too.
Yes, she was.
She joined shortly after we started.
Okay, on Zoom, Tim, Diane, anything? You guys good, Jim?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay,
Have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Second.
Right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, thank you.